It's consolidation time for telecom, and jobs are the biggest casualty. Back of the envelope calculations show the industry once started as India's sunrise sector shed at least 75,000 jobs this year alone thanks to cutthroat competition and the highly disruptive entry of Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Jio. Smaller players like Tata Tele is shutting shop, and even bigger players are looking for consolidation as a means for survival. In fact, the telecom sector, which employs roughly 3 lakh professionals, has shed around 25% of the workforce in just the past 12 months.
Now, interestingly, these large-scale layoffs come at a time when the government is looking to prop up the job market against the backdrop of the general slowdown. Many telecom CEOs ET now spoke to admitted that they're trimming the manpower and not refilling the vacant positions. So who is responsible for the sorry state of affairs in Indian telecom? Can the incumbent players put all the blame on Jio for vitiating the scene? Can the government absolve itself from the charges of making the industry unviable? And more importantly, where will these employees go with pink slips in their hands? The massive layoff in the telecom sector, its casualty on the larger economy, is a big debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us, because joining us on the show are Rajan Mathew, Director General COAI, Sanjay Kapoor, Industry Expert, RSP Sinha, former CMD, MTNL, and A. Ramachandran, partner, MR Partners, who have actually scripted this report on the layoff. So thanks each one of you for being with us. Mr. Ramachandran, because you are the author of this report, I think it's only fair that I begin things with you, and to put it in perspective, have employees been the largest casualty of the troubles that telecom has seen in the last 2 to 3 odd years, the kind of consolidation, the cutthroat competition, the cost cutting and all of that? Have employees been at the receiving end of this carnage?
I think, more than the sector has gone through its own downturns, but more than that, I think employees have, have borne the brunt of all these consolidations and all the cost cuttings that these telecom companies have been doing. We have seen the report, right? Close to around 75,000 of them are without a job, and it's going to be a huge challenge.
Rajan, since you sort of represent the GSM operators in the industry, bulk of this bloodshed, and there is no other word for this, has happened in the GSM space. Is this indicative of what's happening on ground? 75,000 jobs, is that the scale of layoffs that you look at? Because, industry looks at it from the point of view of revenues lost, profitability lost, EBITDA margins being impacted, etc., etc. Very often we don't speak about the impact on jobs, which is why we're dedicating this show to the impact of jobs on account of the reset that's happening in telecom. Is this as bad as the report seems to suggest? Rajan.
Yeah, Sandeep, unfortunately, there is a substantial impact on employment when you consider that in the space of a year or so, we've gone from 13 operators in a circle to about 4. So that magnitude of the reduction in just the number of operators can tell you what has happened in terms of the employment in the sector. So if you've lost about 50% of your operational base, the fact that you've lost a substantial amount of employees should come as no surprise. However, one needs to keep in mind that, when you look at the adjustment factor, what we're really looking at is folks losing employment, but having to really be reskilled and retrained for the new opportunities that are at the cusp of the opportunities in the industry. So I think that's the way we really need to look at this. Bad right now, but certainly there are silver linings as we look to go forward.
I think you're actually directing me and you're cueing me to my next question. And Sanjay, while a lot of people will believe that the carnage that has gone on in telecom and the pink slips that have been handed over are largely on account of Rel Jio's disruptive entry, the kind of consolidation that the industry did see, the cost cuttings that began. But the issue also is, so A, obviously the question is it all on account of that? And B, did the industry also fail to reskill its staff? Because CVs that were relevant 10 years back obviously have no relevance today. So in some sense, the reskilling, the retraining, the repurposing that Rajan alluded to perhaps also did not, find favor with the industry at large.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with your disposition here. My own take is that you cannot blame it on Rel Jio and the pricing that exists in this market. I think we need to go back to 2003, 2004 And the biggest displacement caused in the employment markets in this country was led by a few industries, and telecom was leading the bandwagon. At that stage, telecom became an employer of choice, and also all the displaced guys from the traditional industry had an opportunity to come here. And FMCG contributed big time, office automation contributed big time. And at that time, the reskilling happened on the job. It is not that there were reskilling institutes that were there that trained people. Reskilling really happened as people moved into the industry and learned because the industry was evolving. And then after this, this became really a paradise for FMCG, office automation, and many other industries, including colas, to find greener pastures in this industry. I think what really has led to this debacle in my mind is a wrong structuring of the whole industry. Fortunately or unfortunately, telecom is not an industry where at any stage 13 operators saw a fortune or a sustainable business model. But the government licensing policy at that stage created an arbitrage opportunity, and therefore people jumped into it because they thought they could make quick buck out of selling their licenses at a premium in a very short frame. And they knew that at no stage so many people will be able to have a sustainable business model. The problem is that that was fallacious. This industry was never capable of supporting 13 players in the market and a perfect competition. World over, it's an oligopoly that sustains in this market, and that's what we have reconciled to finally. This industry has relegated itself back to an oligopoly. The problem is the casualties have happened because this industry went into a perfect competition mode, which was absolutely not sustainable in the reckoning. So I think that's what has led to this big problem, and not just the Relgio. Now to reskill these guys, you're absolutely right. While telecom was growing and becoming more and more pipe business, the OTT players and the e-commerce was taking birth in this country. And the skills required to prevail in those markets are very different from the skills required to run a telco. And I think that migration has not happened because of debt in the industry, because the industry reconciled to being a pipe provider. Nobody really went into this newer age model of digital businesses that they wanted to imbibe and build on. So that has not happened in India. And therefore, today, there'll be so many people out in the market who just might be irrelevant to today's market, which is probably hiring and creating the new displacement in the market.
That's a fair point you're making, but RSP Sinha, is it fair then to blame the government for it? Because, you know, it was the government that created this arbitrage opportunity. We all know what happened in 2007 when the license were given out in a flawed, corrupt manner, for lack of a better word, by the government back then, and created this opportunity for taking a market from 4-5 operators to 14 operators. And now the forces of market and competition have brought the market back to 4 operators. In the process, you've lost 75,000 jobs. Is that a simple assessment of the situation?
One thing I would like to mention, Gurumurthy, that as far as putting a blame on new operators will not be justified. Reason being, the demise of the smaller players were already known 3-4 years back when the new players were not there. Like you mentioned about Tata Tele, Reliance Communication. So they were not doing well, and it was very much clear on the horizon that they are going to wind up today or tomorrow. And the same thing has happened. Second thing I would say that, of course, the spectrum price, we have not learned from the 92-93 auction, when many of the players could not make the payment of the license fee which was auctioned, and they had to migrate to a revenue sharing formula. Here also on 3G count, the debt became so huge that it was very difficult to sustain, and it was known that there, as Sanjay Kapoor said, that so many players are not going to remain. It was true that everybody thought that once you get into telecom business, you get a gold mine and you can sell it and make money. For some time it was there, but it was known that smaller marginal players will have to go away and consolidation will take place. Second thing was that communication can be a facilitator. It cannot be a job provider in long range, because once you reach the tele-density, then the jobs will depend upon value-added services, the reorientation of the employees, which are, and already even the government-owned companies were burdened with too much workforce. where it was very difficult to sustain. We are talking about 4-5%, but in BSNL, MTNL, the revenue, the expenditure of employees were almost 40 to 50% of the revenue. Right. So to sustain that also, you have to really come out with a VRS and reduce your manpower. But as far as telling is concerned that so many people are going to lose their job, it is true. Once the consolidation will take place, the job will go away, and they will have to find out the value-added services and reorient themselves for again getting associated with the telecommunication facilities.
Right. Mr. Ramachandra, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you expect things to get worse from here on? I mean, is the worst behind us, or is this carnage only going to deepen? Because we will perhaps be left with just 3 operators. I mean, Relcom folding up operations for 2G means there will just be Rel Jio and Idea Voda combined, and then, of course, Airtel. Do things look to be getting worse from here on?
We have hit the bottom, right? So I think, we have to only look forward to. I often talk about China as an example. China has only 3 operators. I mean, Sanjay spoke about oligopoly, right? I think we have reached there, and I don't see too much of challenge going ahead. The headwinds are strong, obviously, right? But we'll be left with probably 3 operators in this country, and that is how it ought to be.
Rajan Matthews, why isn't there so much of hue and cry over this layoffs in telecom? Another sector which is IT. 5,000 odd jobs get lost in a sector that generates lakhs of jobs every year, and there's so much of hue and cry over job loss in IT. It suddenly feels like as if it's a national issue. 75,000 jobs have been wiped out in a period of 1 year, and yet why is there no hue and cry? Is it because the industry sort of feels like this is the only way to become more viable? Why is it that there is no hue and cry? Why isn't there pressure on the government to make policies more more favorable for the industry to be sustainable, to keep these jobs? Why aren't we seeing any hue and cry? It's almost as if nobody cares.
Sandeep, for the last 2.5 years, we've been crying hoarse about the financial plight of the industry. And unfortunately, all that we've seen is a continuing extraction of revenue from the industry. We've been complaining about the unsustainability of the business model. We've been complaining about the fact that consolidation is happening as a result of this. We've been talking about the unbearable debt burdens that have come up as a result of the spectrum prices that have been there. So I think there's a combination factor that we've been talking about to the government. Now, the fact that there has been no action taken, and you've allowed, if you will, the marketplace to allow the attrition of these companies, has led to the slow sort of process of losing jobs. I don't think people should say this is a surprise. When the industry is shrinking, when your margins are suspect and everybody is negotiating how to manage your margins, it should come as no surprise that headcount is usually the first casualty of these types of adjustments when you're trying to maintain profitability and manage your margins. So I'm not sure why this should come as a surprise. The fact that we haven't made headlines probably was supplanted by the headlines of the distress of the overall industry. One should have made that correlation that this would ultimately reflect in lower employment numbers.
Rajan, I think what you're saying is really hitting the nail, and you're in some sense also answering my question. But Sanjay, I'll ask you this. When it was about IT, and when the pain points were being felt in the United States and the visa norms were getting tougher and things were looking tougher for the Indian IT industry, it was all about jobs. It was all about the number of layoffs that will happen, the impact it will be on the industry, the impact it will be on consumption. Whereas for telecom, even though jobs were being reduced every single day, the focus was always on financials. Even the narrative was never about the people who will lose their jobs. And perhaps I think the operators have to be blamed for the fact that this was never really talked about. Obviously, this is an inference that policy makers and opinion makers and columnists should talk about, but nobody did. Everybody spoke about the financials, and which is where that emotional connect was perhaps lost, and it did not get the sympathy of a collective consciousness that it deserved. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I tend to agree with you on 2 counts. First, that the whole rhetoric and the discussion around people in telecom has been absolutely sublimed and has not been talked about as much as it has in the IT industry. And there's a reason for that. The manpower as a cost in IT industry is a lot higher element as compared to in telecom. There are other factors which take precedence in telecom over people in share volumes. And that is why probably this is not forefront in discussion. That is one. The second thing is that the industry has been inundated with so many issues that I think this people stuff has got somewhere hidden or camouflaged in the whole stuff. So it has not come to light. My own take, and I disagree, with one point of view that probably this is bottoming of the problem. I still have a big worry around BSNL and MTNL. They have more manpower than the whole industry put together. And are they going to survive in the long run? I have my doubts, right? And where is that manpower going to go? So we have not seen the bottom. That is one. Second thing is, when there were so many players in the market, they were competing with this for the same talent in the market, and therefore the remunerations in the industry went up, the perquisites in the industry went up because everybody was trying to attract talent and retain talent. Now with those pressures gone and three operators in the market, I think the salaries will come down. The guys who are earning a lot of money will be under pressure to perform much better. So the whole dynamics around people are going to undergo a change in this industry. I don't see it bottoming out. I think you will see more of it with state incumbents if they don't survive in the near future or medium term. And the dynamics on people front will go away. But I think IT, the emphasis on people is a lot higher because it's a very high percentage of their overall cost structure, which is not so in telecom.
Sure. RSP Sinha, since we have spoken of BSNL, MTNL, who better than you to talk about that since you've been a chairman of MTNL? But the fact remains that the state of telecom-owned giants from the time you were running MTNL to now, it's abysmal. Frankly, many people should ask the question, if the government is thinking of getting out of Air India, why should the government continue to be in telecom operations and run BSNL and MTNL? I think that question is going to be asked at some point, even though telecom is seen as a strategic sector. But do you believe the worst is yet to come, that we haven't seen the worst, and the moment you look at the public sector, the problem is actually even more severe?
Percent with I have seen. I generally keep in touch with my people in MTNL, and I have found because when I was there, we were having a cash balance of more than 8,000, 9,000 crores. Today, it is laden with a debt of more than 14,000 crore. Now, you have to support even 50,000 people, and day by day the revenues are coming down. Then how will you sustain and survive in the market? That is a big question. Second thing, as Sanjay Kapoor was telling, the manpower issues had not got highlighted, because one thing what happened, this never it was pointed out that because of the debt burden, the companies focused on cost cutting measures and they started cutting corners, which was the most easiest was to reduce the manpower, and it has gone there. If it was highlighted, then I think the government should have come out with some more reliefs, which today they have agreed for the prolonging the repayment of the spectrum, but as far as revenue sharing, the revenue sharing and license fees are concerned, nothing has happened. There should be substantial reduction in that also, because if you don't reduce that and don't help them, how are the companies going to survive? They will never be able to. The same thing happened with the private sector also. They were expecting 3G prices went unreasonably high. It was not, in my view, they were not reasonable and logical to pay so much of amount and expecting revenue which can compensate it.
Fair point indeed. Mr. Ramachandra, we cannot not talk about the government in this sector, because this sector is fairly regulated, sees a lot of exchange of ideas and a lot of policy norms that affect and impact this sector really. The pain point, and many people believe, is largely also on account of government apathy. I mean, telecom needs a lifeline. The financials are in a mess. The sector is seeing bloodshed, like Sandeep spoke about earlier. And yet the IMG that has been constituted to offer a lifeline hasn't come up with solutions. I mean, what are they waiting for? For the sector to collapse before any sort of remedial steps are taken? I'm actually appalled that this IMG keeps meeting. What are they waiting for things to get worse?
I think Rajan has been talking about it, and I've seen a lot of reports from COA on this. There have been challenges. We spoke about spectrum usage charges. The IMG is suggesting that it should come down. We are talking about GST should be at par with essential services. These are certain things I believe Rajan has been talking to the government about.
All right, completely out of time, Rajan Matthews, to Ramchandra and Sanjay Kapoor and RSP Sinha, 75,000 job loss. That's a scary number, but it's a collateral damage on account of a sector that's been in turmoil and a sector that seems to have had government apathy for far too long.
Now, the market has forced consolidation in the Indian telecom sector, and that has resulted in shrinking of jobs. The new reality entails fewer operators, a smaller ecosystem, and of course fewer jobs. But is it all on account of hyper-competition, consolidation, or is government apathy to be blamed as well? Thank you very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.
Up next is Top 10 at 10. Keep it with ET Now. Good night.